freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 527 of Gun Freedom Radio, where we engage, we educate, and we inform. We are brought to you by Pot of Gold Estate Auctions. That is POGauctions.com, where you set the price on guns, coins, ammo, jewelry, accessories, cars, boats, antiques, collectibles, you name it. That is POGauctions.com. I am your host today, Cheryl Todd. My co-host, Dan, the other guy, is under the weather, so he wishes everyone well and wishes he could be here. Our guest today is Chris Cheng. Chris is an American sports shooter, Second Amendment and diversity outreach advocate, and History Channel's Top Shot Season 4 champion. And now Chris has authored The Purple Heart Battalion, which tells the story of Japanese American soldiers of the 100th Battalion, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team during World War II, men who fought with extraordinary courage for America while many of their own families were unjustly incarcerated back home. It is a historical novel about love, honor, survival, and what it means to belong to a country that is not always fully believed that you belong. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, Chris Cheng.
Thank you so much for having me on, Cheryl. I'm really excited to be here today.
Me too. And we first kind of got the idea about this project from you back in January of 2026. We're now in August of 2026. Well, we were at SHOT Show together, and I was excited then, and I'm excited now. Because many people know you as a champion shooter and a Second Amendment advocate. So how did your career arc bring you to evolve into writing a historical novel about one of the most remarkable military units in American history?
Life has a funny way of doing things sometimes. And this whole journey for me, writing the Purple Heart Battalion, started over 6 years ago. And it was the early pandemic when there was a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes happening here in San Francisco, where I live, in LA, New York, Seattle, and all parts of our country. And it was extremely disheartening. And for me, I'm the kind of person, when something bad happens that affects me, I ask myself the question, what can I do? Right? I don't want to think about waiting for other people to do something. So I asked myself this question: what can I do, given my specific set of skills, my experience, my passion? Naturally, given my firearms and self-defense background, that was where that was sort of where my first thoughts came in, which was, how do we physically protect these poor Asian Americans who were getting attacked? And a lot of these attacks were against elderly Asian Americans. I mean, it was some of the most disgusting, vile attacks. These were young kids attacking elderly people. I mean, it's incredibly heinous, so upsetting. And many of these elderly Americans died as a result of their injuries. So naturally, I was thinking about, okay, I started to get a lot of questions about first-time gun ownership. Hey Chris, how do I learn how to shoot a gun? I'm scared of all of this violence happening out in the streets. Here in a progressive city like San Francisco, the politics and the politicians were handcuffing, figuratively, the San Francisco Police Department. It was just extremely hard to arrest people, let alone charge and prosecute and jail people. We had a hyper progressive district attorney at the time who basically excused one of the murderers by saying that he was just having a bad day. So if you're having a bad day, right, does that mean that you can just go and commit all sorts of crimes and kill people and be excused of your crimes? I mean, this was the environment that I was in, which was unacceptable, right? It was just flat out unacceptable. And again, I asked myself the question, what can I do to change the perception of Asian Americans being a target, right? So that was one very predominant idea. Number two, creating the Asian Pacific American Gun Owners Association, APA-GOA, right? Creating this gun group for Asian Americans was another big accomplishment. And in brief, we were part of the Supreme Court SCOTUS decision. We submitted an amicus brief out of the 80-some amici brief. I believe that's the plural of amicus, amici brief.
Might be Amici. I don't know. I don't
Amici.
speak
It might be Amici.
legalese.
Anyway, our amicus brief was a standout in that we were one of the only briefs that brought human stories of real Americans of Asian descent who were impacted by gun control and negatively impacted by gun control in the context of the pandemic, such as 10-day waiting periods. And so it was a really interesting time. Now back to the Purple Heart Battalion. Another interesting thing happened. Long story short, I got an email from a casting director for a TV show that Snoop Dogg was the showrunner for, and he was the celebrity judge. And they wanted to do a more dangerous version of America's Got Talent. So they wanted weapons people, naturally, right? They had found me through some of my YouTube videos where I am shooting guns at musical steel plates and playing music, right? So they invited me onto the show. And as I was researching what my acts were going to be, I had a World War II themed act where I had a Thompson submachine gun, a 1911, and M1 carbine. And I Googled guns of World War II, Asian Americans, because I wanted to see if I had any kind of personal connection to these firearms. And the very first result to show up was the Purple Heart Battalion. And I had never heard of these guys at all. I am a native Californian. I went to public school, kindergarten through college. And I'm half Japanese, right? So and I'm half Japanese and half Chinese. And so I was aware of the internment camps, but that was sort of where my historical knowledge started and ended in the context of what Japanese Americans' involvement in the war was. And it was always a multiple choice question or, an AP history, maybe an essay topic that, maybe I need to write. But so it never really registered to me that there was a military unit, the 100th Infantry Battalion, who earned this nickname, the Purple Heart Battalion, for all of the fierce fighting and bravery that they displayed on the battlefield. And then the 100th Infantry Battalion basically became a part of what is actually still called the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. And when I learned about how many of these men, they volunteered for the U.S. Army from the incarceration camps. And so to back up a second, December 7th, 1941, Japan bombs Pearl Harbor. And that changed everything for the U.S.'s involvement in the war, but it also had dire unconstitutional consequences for Americans of Japanese descent who were living here. President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066. And with a single stroke of a pen, he assigned 120,000 innocent Americans of Japanese descent he assigned them as enemy aliens, stripped them of their constitutional rights, and sent them to one of 10 concentration camps in America. Many of us grew up, what the word is internment, right? The internment camps. And over the past 6 years, as I've been researching this issue, that word internment is infuriating to me now because it is a softening of the history of what actually happened, right? When you were a kid, and even as an adult, like if you hear someone was interned, like it's soft. It's a very soft, weak word. It's very unclear. Like I think internment, I think like internship, right? Oh, you're an intern at a company having a good time as a summer intern. No, like internment is incarceration, right? It is you are in a prison. You are treated like dirt by the government. And that was literally what these incarceration camps were. There was one in Boston, Arizona. There were a number, and I believe another one, Gila River in Arizona, multiple in California, Heart Mountain up in Wyoming, Camp Jerome in the South. And these are desolate, outdoor, hastily built outdoor prisons. And if you can imagine, right, that you and your family, all of a sudden one day you are going about your business, government agents knock on your door and they say, hey, Chris, you are of Japanese descent. And Executive Order 9066 has told us that the president says anyone of Japanese descent is an enemy alien of the state. You and your family need to report at this government facility on this date and time. You are allowed to bring one bag weighing no more than 100 pounds. And then you're going to get shipped out. And they didn't know exactly what was happening. They just knew you had to report to a certain place. And next thing you know, they're out in the middle of a desert, with just, this like one bag of belongings. So in this environment, you had these men who, when the government realized that they should be giving the opportunity, right, for Japanese Americans to volunteer for the army and fight for America, which is very ironic, right? To volunteer to fight for freedom abroad when you and your family are behind barbed wire with machine gun towers not pointed outward, they're pointed inward at you. That is an extraordinary moment in U.S. history. And it is at the core, it is what the Purple Heart Battalion novel is all about. It is about bravery under impossible circumstances. It is about patriotism and literally fighting for freedom, putting your life on the line for a country that betrayed you, that stripped you of your constitutional rights and put you in an outdoor prison camp. And these men, they rose above all of that. They said, I want to restore my family's honor. I want to demonstrate and prove my loyalty to America when so many Americans at the time were castigating Japanese Americans, that even the many of them that were American citizens, right? They basically were being told that you don't belong here. Go back to where you came from. And they were born here. They're American citizens. Like their home is in California. It's in Arizona. It's in Oregon, Washington, etc. So I'm really excited to be taking these next steps to self-publish the book, and it's just been such an incredible journey.
I cannot wait to read what you've researched, what you've written, because I, like you, know very little about this really horrible piece of our American history. I talk a lot about, patriotism. I talk a lot about the American flag, and I say it isn't free from stains and tears, right? And this is definitely a stain and a tear in our history. But I originally had heard about it from my husband, Dan, my co-host, because his history teacher, when he was a boy, had been incarcerated, been interned,
Wow.
incarcerated, right? I had not heard about it at all. I don't know how that escaped my history lessons because I've lived in Arizona and grown up in Arizona, a little bit in Southern California, but mostly in Arizona. And as you said, Gila River, there was a camp there. You said there was two in Arizona?
In Poston.
Boston. I'm not familiar with that one, but right here in our own backyard. And once I learned about that, of course, I met him as an adult, Danny as an adult, and learned about all of this. We have always been self-employed and, built businesses out of an idea, right? Out of the thin air and, the hard work of our backs. And where my brain would always go is, so what about people like us? If we had happened to have been Japanese and happened to have lived during that time, everything we've worked for is just gone. It's just
Right.
shuttered. It's just
That's
taken away.
That's right,
And
right. You had Japanese American families who basically abandoned their farms. They didn't show up at work, the next day because they just thought, oh, we're the government told us to report to this address on this date and time, and they didn't know that they were going to be taken and jailed. And so, a lot of businesses were appropriated by. I mean, I guess I'll just say, I mean, a lot of white people, right, appropriated the businesses that Japanese Americans were running. Basically stole the land. And I mean, it was a weird time. It's like, well, you know that your Japanese American neighbors have just basically been disappeared by the government. And there's no social media back then, so you didn't really have a fix on exactly what was going on. And
mhm.
you see this, empty farm field or empty business storefront, customers showing up, right, wanting their dry cleaning, wanting to buy groceries. So, but right, so and how people's houses got lost, right? Squatters moved in.
Wow. That
And
is
can you
so sad.
imagine? Yeah, right. So you can imagine, 3, 4 years, living in an incarceration camp. Then after the war ends, you get freed, but you come home. And I mean, that's a whole nother story. I dive a little bit into that at the end of the Purple Heart Battalion of how difficult it was for a lot of the Japanese Americans to rebuild their lives when they came back to Little Tokyo and Los Angeles and other right cities and towns. And right, the government had taken their money out of their bank accounts, and their businesses were gone, their homes were now occupied by strangers.
Wow.
Like
Was
right,
there, go ahead.
it was just such an impossible situation.
Was there
And
any attempt on the part of the government to, I mean, you can't restore, you can't make up for all of those lost years and all of that, but was there any attempt at all? Um,
there thankfully was. It was mostly symbolic.
mm,
Almost 50 years later,
mm,
it was in the 80s and the 90s when Presidents Reagan and Clinton were both a part of reparations, and it was like $25,000 per impacted citizen. So,
$25,000.
$25,000, right? I mean, for
Ooh,
a
wow.
huge injustice.
Wow.
So, there was that. And then, President Clinton was a part of a Medal of Honor upgrade ceremony. So, a lot of the soldiers in the Purple Heart Battalion, they were denied or not considered for medals of honor at the time of their initial commendation. And as part of the reparation process, there was a re-review, right, of some of these top military honors. And so the Purple Heart Battalion, they are the most decorated unit in U.S. military history.
Wow.
And for the size and duration of their service, and they have 21 medals of honor and
Wow.
8 presidential unit citations, which is a huge commendation. 9,500 Purple Hearts, and the list
Wow.
goes on and on and on. Um, and so, sure, the government actually, I would say, I think they did enough to make this right. Um, but where my mindset is for us now, right? We have you, me, everyone alive today. Like we have nothing to do with the decisions of the past,
Mm-hmm.
right? However, we are fully responsible for the decisions of today and tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I really want the history and the lessons of the Purple Heart Battalion to carry forward. And some of those lessons are that we should not be unconstitutionally incarcerating people based on race or ethnicity. And we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing, right, we're seeing this happening. And it's, and so right, we have current day applications where the lessons of the Purple Heart Battalion can be applied. Um, and then, this is a tough time in our country. Feeling America's pain and the turmoil, I feel like just like the social fabric of our country is tearing apart, right? We are losing our moral center. Um, we are not respecting differences of opinion as well as we used to. I think we are letting emotion drive too much of the debate and the decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think when we are overly emotional, we are thinking less. And I don't think there's any leader out there who would say, "Hey, Cheryl, when you need to make a really big, important decision in your life or for an organization, you know, put all your emotions to the forefront. Just let your emotions guide the way." It's like, no, 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 no. I mean, like emotions play a role, of course, but you're right. We need to be thinking our way through this and understanding the implications of our actions. And that simple concept just seems to be flittering away. We see it in our criminal justice system, like I mentioned earlier, that we no longer punish people for committing crimes. It just feels like in lots of cities, in progressive cities in particular, right? You can commit a crime, and you know what? You are going to get a lot of sympathy from people. You're stealing stuff. Oh, well, they had a really tough childhood and they're poor, so it makes sense that they're stealing. It's like, no, like these are, I mean, it's sad, of course, but sorry, like the laws are here for a reason. I support law enforcement to enforce those laws. And these simple concepts seem to be fastly slipping away from us. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, the Purple Heart Battalion, I really want the reader to think about justice, to think about fighting for the things that you believe in,
Mm-hmm.
even when the world and our country feels like maybe it's going in the wrong direction for you in whatever the way that might mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
But America for me is about freedom and it is about liberty, and we are not perfect. We
Mm-hmm.
tried to be the best version of America that we can be. And that's what the men of the Purple Heart Battalion did. And I am so inspired by their action, right? That talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. It's action. And these men, the men of the Purple Heart Battalion, were all about action.
Absolutely. And it is wild when you think about how the pendulum seems to swing and how we can sometimes, be on the hamster wheel of history sometimes where we, end up doing similar things over and again. Because I was thinking about COVID. You said this idea came at COVID. I was thinking about COVID when, again, I fully believe that the government completely overstepped the Constitution, completely overreacted to information. And shut people's businesses down there, right? And incarcerated us in some ways, or interned us, or
Mhm.
whatever word, in our own homes. And because I was in Arizona, I had a little bit easier time of some of it. But we had a retail gun shop at the time, which thankfully was, deemed, we were allowed to stay open during all of the craziness. But our auction house that we still have, we had to completely change our business model. We could no longer have a congregation of people, which was such a part of our culture and our fabric of people gathering together and forming relationships, and then also, by the way, buying things at pot of gold auctions. But other places, especially California, I think there were businesses that were completely decimated,
It
and
was oppressive.
yes, absolutely. And there is no fix for that. There's no going back 25,000 whole dollars or not, right? You can't restore that. It's a complete break in people's spirit and timeline and so on and so forth. And so, thinking about what happened during World War II, these people are ripped out of their homes, out of their communities, out of their jobs, out of their businesses. They're herded off to some random location. Now, I know that Pearl Harbor happened in December. I don't, but they were incarcerated for years.
Years.
So it's right now August in Arizona, which is where I
Hmm.
live. It's 118 degrees outside.
Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, people die from that kind of heat. It is just, it permeates, and it never gets cool at nighttime. It stays over 100 degrees at nighttime. So, you know, they're the end of the war, they're released, they go back to their what? What did they go back to? And I'm sure that people probably had, a jaundiced view of them still, right?
Of
Because I'm
course. Oh,
sure there was a
yes.
ton of propaganda to help people, feel like, oh, well, it's good that these people are taken out of our community, right? How do they integrate back in?
Yeah, I mean, it was still incredibly difficult to reintegrate. There was still a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment, right, in the post-World War II era. And some families never recovered, right? They were destitute,
Yeah.
right? And they really suffered and never recovered. But thankfully, there were many families who did recover. And so, the main protagonist. So the Purple Heart Battalion, the version I wrote is a historical fictional account. And so we see the protagonist, Daniel Tanaka, go from being a UC Berkeley college student. He's a baseball player, and we see the full cycle. Goes from baseball field back to home in Little Tokyo, where his family is then, ordered to go to a relocation center, then off to the incarceration camp, to boot camp, to the battlefield, to Dachau concentration camp in Germany, and then
Wow.
coming back home and rebuilding his family and building the family legacy and restoring the family legacy, over the next two generations, through Daniel's son and then his grandson. And so it's a really powerful story. And the 6 years of research that I did, it's a combination of online research. There's a lot of Japanese American organizations like Densho, spelled DENSHO. They have an incredible online repository of first person testimonials from many of the soldiers from the 100th and the 442, testifying about their wartime and post-wartime experience as well. There's a wonderful book called Facing the Mountain by Daniel James Brown. That is a nonfiction account. He is also the author of Boys in the Boat, who I believe is a New York Times bestseller. It is also a movie that George Clooney was involved in. And so, Facing the Mountain is another excellent book about the 442 and the 100th. Um, and then, most importantly for me, I think, was going to Italy and going to France, visiting these battlefields, walking the same ground, really understanding the treacherous terrain. In Italy, we're talking about extremely steep mountain hillsides that, if you can imagine, add rain and sleet and freezing temperatures, and the Nazis had the upper hand, right? They had nested in at the peaks of these mountains and had machine guns pointed downward, and they had months of advanced preparation. And the Allied forces and the Purple Heart Battalion show up, trying to literally, you know, move up, take over these mountains. And I bring that level of realism to the book. And it's one thing to hear someone describe, a very steep terrain, but what are the implications of that on the battlefield? And then, I'm a civilian, but as a gun guy, I can imagine having, a 9-pound M1 Garand, or, a 20-pound BAR with, way more, the 60-pound, rucksack and all the ammunition, trying to make your way up this muddy, slippery hill as you've got, machine guns pointed at you and grenades
Yeah.
and rocket launchers, coming your way. It was such an important part of my research process to see where
Mm.
these events actually happened. In France, you've got these incredibly dense pine forests,
Mm.
and the Germans were firing artillery rounds, into the treetops.
Mm.
And what was happening, is these artillery rounds would hit the treetops, and these pine tree shards, these ginormous splinters,
Oh,
would
wow.
come raining down
Like
on the
shrapnel.
soldiers. All this shrapnel would injure, maim, and kill with
Mm.
great effect. And
Mm.
to be in this forest and, not just looking at the density of trees, but looking up at the canopy, and
Mm.
and there's still foxholes that are
Mm.
still preserved from the battles, and being able
Wow.
to, I was, sitting and, laying down in some of these foxholes. And and honestly, like, one of the most important parts of these trips was meeting the townspeople
Mm.
whose towns were liberated by
Mm.
Japanese American soldiers. And so
Wow.
you have these French and Italian citizens who know more about the men of
Mm.
the Purple Heart Battalion than your average American.
Wow.
Every year, they celebrate the liberation of their town, and often they choose one soldier from the Purple Heart Battalion, tell his story, commemorate him, celebrate these brave men who freed their town. And so, these townspeople, the older ones, they were children, right?
Mm.
During World War II, they were 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. Now they're in their 90s. I mean, but they're still here. And for me to hear their testimonials in person about how they saw they saw Japanese faces
Yeah.
liberating their town, but they saw the American flag on their shoulders. They
Yeah.
saw, the U.S. Army issued gear, and they knew that America and the men of the Purple Heart Battalion were there to free them, and they did. And seeing these annual celebrations and commemorations of the liberation of their town, and calling out men of the Purple Heart Battalion for making that happen, was truly, truly special.
That sounds amazing. Like I'm feeling a little choked up. That, after all these years, these men and their efforts are still celebrated and remembered. Because that's not why they went there, right? They weren't going there to try to be celebrated and remembered. That's just amazing to me. do we know how many Japanese Americans served
Yeah, there were about
in?
18,000 men who served in the 100th Battalion and 442nd Regimental Combat Team. And like you said, right, the nobody joins the military to be, celebrated. You are there to do a job. You're there to defeat the enemy. This was about fighting fascism and defeating the Nazis. This was about freeing the Jewish prisoners. And for the men of the Purple Heart Battalion, there was this extra weight and responsibility of securing their own freedom and
Mm,
securing their family's freedom from prison back at
mm,
home.
mm,
And at the end of the Purple Heart Battalion, as I mentioned, we end in Dachau, and there is a moment in the book where Jewish prisoners, contextually, the death marches were in progress. And so,
mm,
the Nazis had said, right, okay, well, we surrender. Wasn't like formal, if I remember correctly, but a lot of the Nazi commanders were then kind of finishing the job, if you will, and marching
mm.
Jewish prisoners out with no food, no provisions. Many of them died, and so this was a terrible, terrible right time at the very end of the war. But so you had some Jewish prisoners in one of the Dachau satellite camps who saw a Japanese face, Japanese faced soldier, approaching the gates. And in his diary, he wrote he thought that these were Japanese soldiers who were coming to execute them
Oh, from Japan.
from
Yes.
Japan.
Oh,
And it
wow.
wasn't, and so you had this moment of panic in this
Mm,
concentration camp where Jewish prisoners thought, "Oh my gosh, this is it, right? This is it. The Nazis they're sending in the Japanese allied forces or Japanese Axis forces to come and finish us off." But it wasn't until they saw the U.S. Army uniform, saw the US flag, and realized, oh, these are not our executioners, these are our liberators.
wow.
And that moment in itself is phenomenal. And then when the Purple Heart Battalion is liberating, right, they break the chains off of the gate, and they start rendering aid and triaging the prisoners for medical aid. Uh, do does the protagonist Daniel Tanaka also then it really sinks in that it's over, right? He has been a part of not just winning the war, freeing the Jewish prisoners, but he has secured his own freedom and his
Mm,
family's freedom back at home. And again, this is a lesser told story that most Americans do not know that this happened. And I think it's a really important story to tell. I have endless energy and motivation and inspiration to tell this story to our country because I think we really need some inspiration
mm,
about America right now,
mhm,
in a new story that shines a different light on a dark day, a very, very dark moment in America. But I think there was a lot of lessons, right, to be
mm,
learned. And again, the bravery of these men of the Purple Heart Battalion goes to show that even when your government and when your neighbors are going against you, that there is a way out. And I
mhm,
think if you stand on principle and believe in freedom and American values like freedom and liberty and civil rights, and you back up those words with action, I
mhm,
think that is the America that many of us want to live in.
mhm. Boy, absolutely. So well said. We're getting a little tight on time, but I did want to ask you about how you have come to finance this project because I think that you are so good about, you were at the forefront of was it
The
NFTs back in the
NFT. Ooh,
day,
yeah, that was so interesting, so fun.
right? And now to finance this project, you're using Kickstarter. And I think it's eye-opening and it's encouraging to those of us that feel like, well, there's only the traditional ways of doing the things that we do. And, this was innovative once again. So talk to us about that.
I was initially trying to get a publisher, right, to pick this up. I sent a few query letters, as they're known as. But the publishing industry is so hard to break into. My
Mm.
first book, Shoot to Win, an instructional book on marksmanship. I got a publisher very quick through our friend Julie Golub, who is
Mm.
also published by the same publisher. So she introduced me to her publisher, and I was signed straight away. But that was different, right? Because I was just coming off of my Top Shot win. I'm an expert in this field. However, the Purple Heart Battalion, it's a World War II historical fiction. It is my first novel. Nobody knows me, right, as a fictional novel writer. And so I decided to do crowdfunding, right? And Kickstarter is such an exciting way of building awareness, of providing unique rewards for people who believe in the project. And so the Kickstarter just ended this past week. I'm happy to say I successfully raised almost $21,000 from 236 backers. And so I'm self-publishing this book, right? I'm an independent author, self-publishing. There's a cost to everything, right? There's so many behind the scenes costs. And so raising funds through the Kickstarter, I was selling special editions of the Purple Heart Battalion, a pre-production manuscript, a kind of a high-end collector's hardcover edition that will be autographed and serialized. And so I'm incredibly thankful for my community and network, and the Second Amendment community was a huge contributor, right? Thanks to you and many of our friends and colleagues. It was such a great experience. And now I'm on to the next steps of right, getting the book, the typesetting finished, the cover design, trying to get a whole PR, kind of PR. What do you call it? Like a sort of a project, if you will. Trying to get in front of as
Like a
many media.
campaign.
A
Yeah.
campaign. That's the word I was looking for. Thanks, Cheryl. Right. I really but going out on a nationwide book tour and a media campaign, that all costs money.
Mm.
The plane tickets, the hotels, all the associated food and travel. So the money raised from Kickstarter will definitely be a huge help in
Hmm.
helping me tell this story, and making sure that the story becomes. I want everyone in America to know who the Purple Heart Battalion is, and be inspired by them, be inspired by history, to hopefully feel good about being American again.
Yeah.
If you have lost a little bit of faith, which is, I understand how that may be the case for a lot of people. I know I've been through some low points, right, about
Mm.
how our country has been one way or another. I mean, right, like you mentioned, right, the pandemic shutdown. I mentioned, the violence during the anti-Asian violence and the inaction by local government and law enforcement and the judicial system. When you lose some faith about our country and your neighbors and our political system, that's normal, right? Like, I take a when I was writing the Purple Heart Battalion, one thing that I think is really interesting about when you are researching history, it kind of removed me, right, a little bit from the present day in a useful way, right? And
Hmm.
it made me realize, right, the things that you and me and all of us alive today there have been versions of the high points and the low points that have happened in the past.
Hmm.
So while a lot of these events, let's just focus on the negative events that we see happening in the media. While a lot of these events may feel very new to us,
Hmm.
and some of them are new, but there's probably some analogous
Absolutely.
historical event that's happened before, right? So, I'm sure, right, the civil rights era was a similar struggle
Hmm.
uh, and conversation about civil rights, about gun rights, gun
Hmm.
control,
Yeah.
about race and racism in our country.
Yeah.
And so, and I guess I mention this because it can be so easy to feel down
Yeah.
about America. But when I look back at history, we come out of it, right?
Yeah.
We find our way out of it. Um, we find our way out of it when we talk to each other, though, right?
Mm.
And when we work together to find solutions. And I know compromise has become this like very dirty word, but I think compromise is often necessary. I think when I look at legislation and other political solutions, I think if all sides are a little dissatisfied, I actually think that's kind of success, right? Because if it's either the Republicans or the Democrats claiming victory on a
Yeah.
thing, then that's where the polarization happens,
Yeah.
right? That, it's a zero-sum game and one political tribe is beating the other.
Mm.
I think too much of that is not great for our country. And so the Purple Heart Battalion, one of the one of my hopes is that it's a story that generates the conversation that
Yes.
that connects us, that reminds us that you know what, you and I may disagree on certain political things or philosophical or moral things, but you know what? We can agree to disagree. I will still love you as a friend. I will still love you as a neighbor. And it's okay for us to disagree.
Hmm. Yeah, it's healthy. It's really healthy to disagree. And, if we had, since we really kind of fall on a two-party system, unfortunately, but if we had a strong party on either side, then that tension would create really good decisions in the middle space. And I'm hoping that that will ultimately prevail and that we can once again find ways to have conversations with each other. Of course, social media algorithms work against us very strongly in that. And so, seeing people in real life, like we get to see each other at the SHOT Show every
At
January and
NRA and
right,
other
NRA meetings.
conferences and events.
Absolutely. And it rehumanizes people one to the other. I think that that's important. Whatever other gatherings, like when we used to be able to do that with our auction house, it was amazing that people who would have never met each other before have become lifelong friends just because they both wanted to go shopping. At an auction house, churches, all, Boy Scout gatherings, school events. These are so important and why the whole COVID, thing was so damaging because we were all pulled away from each other and all we could see to connect each other was this algorithmic creating thing, social media, that really kind of like further said, oh, well, you're over in this corner because from your demographics, these are the things that you're interested in. So we're going to try to convince you that everybody believes exactly the way that you do, and you're never challenged because wouldn't that be terrible to be challenged? It's not terrible. It's amazing. I grow and I learn so much when I encounter people that um, respectfully share their ways of thinking with me that may or may not agree.
Yeah. Yeah, it's challenging, I think, for a lot. It's humbling And sometimes I think it can be embarrassing for a lot of people to be challenged, to be
Mm-hmm.
told that I think you're wrong or I disagree with your opinion. And I think there's we need to understand, I think, that dynamic of the human condition, that it doesn't feel great to be told you're wrong. And so understanding that, when I am discussing, debating, disagreeing with, somebody about whether it's, gun rights, civil rights, or anything else, um, I often take an approach of trying to meet somebody where they are
Mm-hmm.
on that particular issue.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of me trying to force talking points on someone, for example, right?
Right.
Instead of trying to force talking points, I want to understand where is this person coming from
Yeah.
with respect to, let's say, gun rights. Why I want to understand, why are they so anti-gun?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you one example. A few years ago, I met a pastor, and she is so anti-gun. She's part of, a lot of the anti-gun organizations out there, but she's a great person, right? She's a great person. She and I, we were part of this larger working group of 18 some people, but she and we had a one-on-one sidebar, and I just, politely wanted, asked her, like, can you tell me more about, like, where are you coming from? And she has a terrible story that she shared with me. And she said, when I was growing up, I remember being 6 years old at the dinner table with me and my older sister. And my parents got into a fight, a really bad fight. And my dad left the dinner table, and he came back with a loaded gun, and he slammed the loaded gun on the table. And he basically said, you all need to fall in line, or else there's, something really bad is going to happen.
Whoa.
So if you are a 6 year
Bless
old
her
child
heart.
who
Yes.
experiences domestic violence like
Yes.
that, and you have a negative, I mean, that is obviously like such a negative association with firearms,
Mm-hmm.
that is so relatable and understandable that,
Mm-hmm.
no amount of me saying, well, standard capacity magazine of an AR is 30 rounds. Like
Right.
she just like, that doesn't, it's not going to
Right.
register right for
Right.
her. And
The
so,
Constitution is my license,
yeah,
Yeah,
shall
that's
not
not
be
going to reach
infringed.
her.
Yeah, it's like all of our little, kind of slogans and talking
Yeah.
points, aren't going to like resonate with her. And so,
Yeah.
and sometimes in these conversations, it's not a debate. Like
Right.
I wasn't trying to convince her
Yeah.
of any of my positions being, I don't know, more or less correct or kind of thing. It was just more, hey, like, let's just like cut through all of like this the debate like kind of stuff. Like I just want to know who you are, and like
Yes.
what your unique life experiences have been that have
Right.
led you to, right, your current belief process.
Right.
And if nothing else, we, I would like to think that, we had some very human moments
Yeah.
in
I
that
love it.
conversation.
I am so out of time. I wish we could keep going for so much longer, but I do need to wrap up. Chris Cheng, this has been amazing. I am so excited about this project. I'm like already seeing in my mind this is going to be a series on Netflix or somewhere, because there's such a story that can unfold and in multiple chapters. I'm already seeing ahead amazing things, and the book isn't even in my hands yet, but I'm looking forward to that
My
too.
goal is I want the Saving Private Ryan version of the Purple
Yes.
Heart Battalion, a major motion picture
Love it.
movie. I would love a Netflix, or HBO Band of Brothers, mini
Yes.
series. I really want to create as many artistic vehicles, the book, a movie, a TV show, create as many of these vehicles as possible to tell this story, because we all learn, right, in different ways and forms, but the book is the start. I'm really excited to, you know, bring people along in this journey. And for
Yes.
those of you that would like to follow along, I'm on social media at Top Shot Chris, website, topshotchris.com. And then if you're interested in purchasing the Purple Heart Battalion, it will be on sale on Amazon and other places books are sold. I'm targeting September of 2026. So hopefully in the next month or so, right, you will be able to buy your very own copy of the Purple Heart Battalion.
I love it. Thank you so much for all you do, Chris Cheng. Bye-bye. My goodness gracious, I could have kept talking on and on. All right, we got to get out of here. But I want to thank Chris Cheng. I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners all over the planet. When you spend your time with us, that is your most valuable and finite resource. We appreciate you for doing that. If you want to go back and watch this video again or share it, we highly encourage that. You can find us on all the places you watch your videos, particularly Rumble and YouTube, now that we're out of jail on YouTube. But please, when you go there, again, with that algorithm, if you will like, share, subscribe, comment, hit the notifications, that tells that algorithm that this is valuable to you. And when things are valuable to the end user, then they have a little hedge against getting canceled and put in YouTube jail. If you want to listen to the audio only version, go to our website, gunfreedomradio.com, click the on demand tab, and binge listen to your heart's content, darling. If you want to see the photos and bios and links to everything that Chris does and every one of our subject matter experts that we've ever had on over the last 10 years, click the guest tab. It is an ever-growing resource, and when you spend time there, we don't hate that. All right, we have a few companies that work with us that support the work that we do. They're not exactly sponsors, but when you will utilize their products, these companies support the work that we do financially. So it's just a wonderful thing. We're all supporting each other's values. So first of all, they are all American-based companies. So if you want American products made on American soil, supporting American jobs, then you will want to check out patriothousehold.com, where you buy all of the stuff that you would normally buy at those big box stores. And those big box stores don't believe in your values. They use your money against you. But patriothousehold.com, if you / GFR for Gun Freedom Radio, whenever you're buying your shampoo and your laundry soap and all your good things, then we get some small portion of that. Also, patriotmobile.com / GFR. We all walk around with these gadgets in our pockets, and they all have to have a plan of some sort, right? So if you will use Patriot Mobile, you get to keep your phone, keep your number, and keep your values. And finally, if you ever do have to use your firearm or any tool of self-protection to protect your life or the lives of others, you will need an attorney on retainer. So go to our website, gunfreedomradio.com, scroll down to Attorneys on Retainer. When you click through there and get a subscription, you will have peace of mind, and we will get some small portion of your subscription. All right, until next time, what are we going to do? We're going to pray for our nation. We're going to pray for our leaders, even the ones we don't particularly like, maybe especially the ones we don't particularly like. And until next time, be good to each other. Have a great week, and God bless.